I got that out of the way. Now we're going to jump to my interview I did Friday morning with David Benford, of course, team lead at the Benford Group, David Benford Group, appropriately named, as well as, of course, he is the broker in charge at Landmark Sotheby's International Realty right here in Wilmington. He's been in the business for over 30 years. And wide-ranging interview. We talked about how he got started in real estate, sort of, what's happening with the current market, as well as sort of his reaction to now here we are a year later from the big National Association of Realtors lawsuit. We also talked about, what's going to be happening with the housing market, sort of how that's going to impact consumers, as well as advice for, agents and how he treats the sort of cyclical market that is real estate. So I was really happy to do the interview. One caveat, of course. So this is the first time, right? Like I said, it was the second time I've done an interview, but it was really kind of the first time since I'm really hoping to do more interviews. And so whenever you do something for the first time, there's going to be a problem. So I took, the board. You can't really see it here. I have it at home. This is how I do the show. And I've decided I'm going to take this board with me because I'm comfortable with it on the road when I do these interviews in various locations. Well, the one thing I forgot is, so if you notice, I use my Shure SM7B, the gold standard when it comes to microphones. And so I use this mic here at my house. But when I'm on the road, I have a Shure MV7, which is a little different microphone. And so the problem is the settings on the board that I had were for this mic. And so my mic wasn't picking it up. It was not picking up me talking. I had it way too low. And if you can see in the interview, I'm kind of freaking out about like why I couldn't hear myself in my headphones. So here's the good news, though. Here's the good news. David sounds phenomenal. So David's mic was great. That's really all I care about. You guys hear me talk enough. The point of these interviews is to hear the guest talk. So I'm glad that David's mic was great. I then eventually tried to boost it as high as I possibly could. So it wasn't as bad, but it starts off, it's awful. My mic, you can barely hear me. Sounds like I'm recording it on like a potato or something. It's not good. But like I said, David's mic is great. His audio's what you want. That's the whole purpose of this, is so you can hear what David thinks about things, not me. And so his mic is good. So I'm just giving you a heads up. My mic is awful. I totally messed it up. It tracks. That's totally what would happen to me. But like I said, I do apologize. And I apologize to David because I was for the first part of the interview, I was kind of freaking out of whether I was actually recording myself because I really couldn't hear myself in my headphones. So I said, what happens if we finish this interview and none of what I said got recorded? And so, first time, going to have some problems. But I appreciate David taking the time, joining us here on the Cape Fear Report. So without further ado, here was my interview with David Benford. David, thanks for joining us here on this new venture. I appreciate it very much. And
thanks for having me.
Taking the time. All right, let's kind of start from the beginning and talk about kind of, when you got started in real estate, or I guess kind of why you got started in real estate.
Well, let's see. The why is because I had just gotten married and needed a more stable income, although I'm not sure real estate was that. But previous to that, I've been doing political consulting, and so
there you go.
Anyway, but my first real estate job was at Bald Head Island, and I like to tell people, although I don't want the real estate commission to know this, but I've put my first house under contract about 10 days before my license arrived in the mail.
Well, you had it though.
I had it.
It was just coming in the mail.
It was coming in the mail. Nowadays I think you get it a lot more quickly than you did in the old days. But so I worked at Bald Head for a couple of years, and then moved back to Wilmington and went to work as a general broker with Intracoastal Realty. Mm-hmm. Then I got in management with Caldwell Banker, Seacoast, and then I started my own company. Grew that to about 50 agents and sold it to Prudential in 2000. And, worked with some developers. I've done a lot of different things in real estate. But back after I sold the company, I spent time just watching my kids play sports for middle school and high school, and I've referred some business, did some business, but was enjoying that time with the kids. And then in 2008, my older son went off to Ole Miss, and the recession came, and I had to go back to work. So I went back into general brokerage and went to work with a fellow by the name of Nick Phillips up at Topsail Island, and have been with him ever since. It was a very small company at the time I joined him, but since then he affiliated with Sotheby's International Realty, and we have grown considerably and now have 5 offices along the coast of North Carolina, starting up at Outer Banks and Duck and all the way down to Ocean Isle. So we cover the coast, small offices, but concentrating on vacation homes, oceanfront properties, and high-end real estate.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because there is people think, oh, real estate's real estate, but there's a huge difference between the mountains, which I know you also have experience with, versus just sort of kind of the like a Raleigh or Charlotte area, and then to be like at the coast, and there's very different things that you need to be aware of, and they've talked about that and how that can be one of the reasons why it's not great when, say, someone is like buying a house here and they're like, oh, I got an agent who works in Raleigh, and they just don't know the things that you need to do here, like flood insurance, things like that. And so I guess kind of talk a little bit about sort of what you've experienced working sort of on the coastal area.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about the coastal area, again, is that most of it is high-end real estate. Yeah. But here in Wilmington, I mean, I deal with just primary homeowners moving from one house to the other within the city or within, nearby, as well as people coming in and buying, second homes on the water. So I've got both of those things. If you're in Charlotte or Raleigh, you're dealing mostly with just primary homeowners. So, and then with us on the coast, what's going on in the Outer Banks is a lot different than what's going on, say, in Calabash or something. Yeah. So it's nice that we can refer business to other brokers with Sotheby's along the coast. I'm not going to drive much past Topsail north, and certainly not much past probably Southport South to go show property. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. But I know those areas, and I know that I have good associate brokers in all those areas that I can refer business to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's another good thing about where you work is sort of having that ability to talk to people in other areas and refer people if they're going to one of those places versus you taking that on.
Absolutely. It's you want to chase all the business you can, but you don't want to wear yourself out doing that, and so
or do a bad job.
Or do a bad job, exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting, when the first time I talked to you about doing an interview was like a year ago.
Right.
And it was mostly because everyone was talking about this National Association of Realtors lawsuit that had been filed, what that was going to mean, what was going to end up happening. Of course, they ended up settling, and it was funny because you saw the headlines and it was like, this is going to change everything. Like the whole real estate industry is going to change. And of course, that was during a time when real estate was just going crazy right after COVID. And so, it made sense. And you had all these reality TV shows. Realtors were becoming celebrities. And you could tell there was sort of like, you could tell that people were like, what's happening in the real estate industry? So everyone was like, this lawsuit's going to change everything. And so, here we are, like kind of a year later, and it doesn't seem like it did much or anything really happened other than you got to fill out a form if you're showing clients houses.
Yeah, well, first of all, we've been ahead of the curve in North Carolina with all of our commission forms that are sanctioned by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission and the North Carolina Bar Association. Mm-hmm. So how we were handling buyers and sellers previous to this lawsuit was done in accordance with what these these attorneys and that were representing the plaintiffs, I think it was Missouri, were seeking. We were already doing it in North Carolina. Mm. The only thing that has changed for us in North Carolina, you just referred to, is now the buyer's agency compensation that ultimately is really coming from the seller is not listed in the multiple listing service. So if I'm going to be showing a house, I want to know, am I going to get paid? So I call the realtor who has it listed and say, hey, are you offering buyer's agency commission? And they say, yeah. And I say, how much? And that's good. Yeah, there's a form to fill out and all that stuff. But that's the only thing that's changed is it's not in the MLS. Sometimes you'll see now people when they're advertising their homes that they have listed, they'll put it in their buyer's agent. You'll see BAC, buyer's agent commission, 2.5%. It's okay to advertise it. You just can't put it in the MLS. Gotcha. And I don't know why. Makes no sense. Lawyers, right. But no, it honestly hasn't changed hardly anything in North Carolina. There are some sellers who say, well, I don't want to pay I read that I don't have to pay the buyer's agent commission anymore. And, I'll say, no, you don't have to, but you do want somebody to come buy your house, don't you? And if you're not going to offer the commission, then the buyer's agent is most likely going to have to go to the buyer for their commission. They're not working for free. And then the buyer is going to say, well, I'm going to discount what I'm offering on that house to cover the commission I'm having to pay. So it's just a wash. And so we pretty much recommend that the seller authorizes us to pay a buyer's agent commission.
Well, that's what's interesting too about, that whole sort of change is because you're right. People are like, I'll have to pay the buyer's agent. And then, from the mortgage side, that all of a sudden, we were having all these discussions about, okay, well, we're going to have to price it into the mortgage. We're going to have to raise. And at a time when people were already close to qualifying, $10,000, $20,000 could all of a sudden be an issue. And then how does that affect VA? How does it, because just all these rules, and then all of a sudden it never came up.
Yeah, I recall, a year ago when all this was going on, thinking that's really going to be ugly when it comes to the mortgage. But like I said, it just hadn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, what's also interesting too is I guess as things have sort of calmed down, and like I said, I mean, you had during the COVID thing, and everyone was just thinking, I guess kind of where I want to go is, there's this sort of myth out there that, real estate agents don't do anything, and it's like, you guys make all this money and you're not really doing anything. And so, it's funny that you talk to real estate agents and it's like the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes that even if you're buying a house, I remember when I was buying a house, like you just don't see what your real estate agent is doing. Not just like paperwork, but just, the negotiations, talking with, inspectors, and just everything that goes on. I think that is sort of a problem, because especially even like the TV shows, you see these realtors and they're all wearing like designer clothes and they're always going out to dinner and they get into like drama at work, but they're never actually doing any work. So I think people are like, that's all that happens in real estate offices.
Real estate is a great job. It is an industry which you can make a lot of money, but it's like anything else. You have to cultivate your clients. You have to take care of your clients. You have to do a good job for them in order to sustain any type of good income. But what we do, a lot of times we do all the work you just mentioned and get paid zero.
Yeah.
Because the deal falls apart.
Yeah.
And so there are times when you have a listing, it sells in 2 days. Everybody loves each other, cash deal, and
I don't like those.
Yeah, I know. And I'm getting a big fat check, and I really didn't do much. But there are times when I've done a whole lot of work, and again, didn't get paid for it. So it's
well, it's funny because we had a situation. We had a client, and on the mortgage side, and they were looking at a house, and then we did all the work, got ready, submitted the loan, everything was good, and then it was the first contingency. They were trying to sell their house, but they ended up not liking that house, and then they ended up going to an entirely different state, found a house, went through the whole process again, but their house wasn't going to sell, so they had to drop that one. So we ended up having to do forward loans, and we finally got paid on the fourth one, but it was like those first three.
I've been there. I've been there, absolutely.
And I mean, what's interesting is that on our side, a lot of it's just us sort of, doing a lot of, input into the applications and, getting reports and everything. But you guys are actually like driving around showing the houses. And so yours is a little bit more out of the office. And so it is more time involved. Like if you're showing multiple houses or you're just more out there because you're meeting someone, you meet an inspector or something along those lines. So it's actually even, I would say I'm more unfortunate on your side, because if someone's looking at 4 houses and 4 deals fall through, you spent way more time on it than we did on the mortgage side.
What about the ones that look at 25 houses? Well, yeah. I've had those, and I've had to say, you know what? I'm going to refer you to somebody else.
Now, one of the things that you do that I'm sure a lot of people are jealous of, but of course, once again, usually when it comes to the higher end properties, can be a lot more work but
sometimes it's not.
That's true. That's true.
When you're dealing with the high-end properties, you're dealing usually with sophisticated buyers and sellers. They've been there before. They're not going to sweat over a broken air conditioning unit.
Yeah.
They know they're business people for the most part, professionals, and they know what they want, and they know that if it's not exactly what they want, they can change it. So I actually think dealing in the upper end of the market is easier, certainly easier than first-time home buyers, although those can be fun too. But
that's true.
And the other thing I did find out, even though I'm just going to contradict myself here, is that I can't assume that all buyers who are buying $2 million properties know what they're doing.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
Because I found that not to be the case too. But nonetheless, I would say that where we are at Landmark Sotheby's is we're dealing with clients that can afford expensive properties, and they take as much time or the amount, or maybe sometimes a little less time than a smaller priced home.
Yeah.
But the commission is a lot larger. So, so I have found that working this market allows me more free time. I don't need to do as many sales as I might have to if I was dealing in, the mid-range market or something. And not that I don't sometimes sell a home in the mid-range market, but for the most part, I'm selling in the upper-end market, and it allows me to make a nice income and spend more time with my family or the mountains or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's sort of it's good and bad, because you're right. The only problem is that there's less inventory at that level, and there's less buyers just because the price point. And so it's right. You probably are going to have a little bit more downtime just because you're just not going to see as much turnover. Because now this is obviously increasing as Wilmington becomes wealthier, and so you are seeing more. It's fascinating to me how many homes I see, couple a week are 1.5 plus a couple a week, where 4 years ago maybe a $1 million listing would hit. And so you're definitely seeing more houses reach that because the prices are rising, but still maybe in the upper echelon, like 3, 4 plus, just you're gonna have fewer buyers.
Surprisingly, there's a lot of them, and of course people like the water.
True.
So if you're on the water or have a boat slip or a view of the water, that's why people come here. That's why I moved here 35 years ago, 37 years ago, was to be on the water. And those properties obviously are more expensive. And we really don't have a shortage of people who want to buy something on the water. We have a shortage of inventory on the water, and that makes it difficult. But inventory, and maybe you're going to want to talk about this next anyway, but inventory is increasing, and the market has certainly slowed down everywhere, including our area. We always sometimes think we're immune to what's happening around the rest of the country, but we're not. So, right now we are seeing more inventory. We are seeing longer days on the market. We're seeing, reduced amount of properties going under contract. And I'm talking about a 17-year low. And, everybody's got plenty of reasons to offer why. The economy, interest rates, whatever, uncertainty. But nonetheless, it's happening, and this business is cyclical. like most businesses, like the economy is. And we're just in sort of a recessionary period within the real estate life cycle.
Yeah.
We're not in a recession, but we're in that area where prices are stabilizing or going down, inventory is going up. And, as a listing agent, which I am, I don't want to give away all my secrets, but my job is to, my inventory is going to increase during this period. Everyone's listing inventory is going to increase. But what I've got to do is keep my sellers happy in a time when it's more of a buyer's market. And to do that, I just have to continually communicate with them, let them know that it's not their house, it's the market. And if they really want to do something, then we've got to do like everybody else and reduce the price. But stay in touch with them, because this cycle will continue to go around, and all of a sudden, if you got a bunch of inventory and all of a sudden the buyers come in, then you've got some sales ready to go.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm approaching this.
Well, it seems like, ever since probably when rates started rising, and probably, I guess it was 22, and you had kind of a little bit of an afterburn there just from everything that was going on after COVID. But then you did see a slowdown, definitely with sort of the more normal housing market, like the mid-range housing market. But then I read these reports, like Redfin or somewhere would say, luxury market is still just going gangbusters. And so do you think that, are we seeing any slowdown? Because we're seeing, once again, kind of a slowdown within the regular housing market. So are you seeing that with luxury, or is luxury somewhat?
Well, let me talk about two different things here. The vacation rental, the vacation home, second home, that has slowed down because a lot of people during COVID were buying these places, figuring out how much income they could receive in renting it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you had a glut in rental properties at all of our beaches. And so some of those folks were like, oh man, I'm not getting the income I thought I was going to get in the purchase of this second home. So they put it back on the market. Sometimes take a loss, sometimes they don't. But the true luxury home, and I'm talking, $3 million plus, and now we're seeing homes in our area, $8 million. And I think we just got to put a contract on a property down at the beach for $14 million. So we're seeing some really high-end stuff happening.
That's not a rental market, right?
No, that's somebody with a lot of cash coming down here and wanting to be on the water, and that isn't suffering. There's just not a lot of that inventory of that product out there, but when it comes up, it's going pretty quick. At Figure 8 and Wrightsville Beach, and even Landfall on the water. So that has, and of course, most of those guys are cash, and so that really hasn't slowed down. It's steady because, again, this little inventory, so you can't just be going crazy, but the, as I said, the second home, that people that are going to rent their properties, that has slowed. And of course, as you already mentioned, the mid-range has definitely slowed down.
Yeah, that's what's sort of interesting, is because, we had sort of a slowdown in 22, and then kind of things picked back up a little bit with regards to prices. That's sort of what I'm looking at. And in inventory, never really kind of came back. But now you're right, we are seeing, national inventories finally reaching kind of levels that we were in 2019, which still wasn't that bad, sort of more normal housing market, but it feels like there's so many houses because we were so under. Do you feel like people are sort of kind of realizing that the 21, 22 housing market is now over? Because, you talk to some realtors and people were still like, I want to list my house for what it would have sold for in 22 or 23.
Yeah, that's a problem for us sometimes. And it's not reality. Certainly not today. It's not reality. The other thing, of course, that is affecting all this is interest rates, and it's not so much that 6 or 7, 6.5, whatever, is terrible. It's just double what it was a few years ago.
Triple.
And a lot of these people, these sellers, still have these 2.75 mortgage rates for 30 years, and they're reluctant to give it up. And I'm one of those people, golly, it's like free money. But But I do think that the inventory back in, of course there was the craze during COVID, but even after that for a year or two, the inventory was low. Yeah. Inventory is not anymore. Builders came in and built, and builders will build all the time usually, and they got to. But inventory was tight because people did not want to sell their homes. They didn't want to give up their mortgages. They didn't, and they didn't know where they were going to go. So now, with the new norm being 6.5 or whatever, and there's a lot of people that say if it drops 1%, that the market's going to take off again. Yeah. Who knows? But with the new norm being that, there are people who have said, you know what, I've been sitting on this 3% rate for all this time, but I want a bigger house. Yeah. I want to move to a better area. There's life changes. So these things happen. So that's what's has sort of increased inventory lately.
Well, that's what sort of, I read this the other day. Someone said the problem is that we are essentially in the opposite of where we were in 08, where in 08 and 09, you had people doing 100% financing, home prices fell, their rates readjusted, and the first thing they got rid of was the house. They walked away. And now, because of the 2.5%, 3% mortgages, the last thing they'll sell their car, they'll get rid of their boat, they're gonna get rid of everything.
Oh, not the boat.
They're gonna hold on to that 2.5% mortgage. So we're almost in the exact opposite situation. That I think it's funny because you see people say like, "Here comes 08 again." I'm like, no, you guys don't realize. No one is going to sell their house. No. And they're sitting on
so much equity.
Right. And so it's like, it's when you look at the foreclosure numbers, it is almost laughable when people talk about an 08 happening again, because it's like, you guys don't know where we were in 08.
That's right.
And so it's weird that we're in this almost exact opposite. But you're right. I think what's going to happen is that because of the equity, I need a bigger house, or I have to move for a job, or I just don't want to live in this location. That is but it's gonna be slow.
It is slower,
but it's growing. I think we've seen the slowest of it. I think we're finally you're seeing families go, okay, we have another kid.
Correct.
We need another house. We'll take that. 6 is where we are. You're right. I think it's amazing that 5. You talk to people and say, wouldn't it be great if rates were in the 5s? Where 22 people said 5. I'm going to wait till they get back down into the 4s. And so I think people's sort of mindset is finally changing after sort of 2 years of higher rates.
I agree.
And I just think it's going to be. That's going to be a big push. But what's interesting about this area is that that is. I think what has been fascinating over the last maybe 10 years since 08 is that we have seen, I think for the longest time, our housing market was very sort of controlled by what was happening in other economies because of the second home market, where you've seen Wilmington grow to the point with industries like Live Oak and Encino that now all of a sudden there is more sort of insulated economy where we still have a huge second home market, but we can now survive if DC or Boston or New York takes a hit.
We can survive, but as I said, we're not immune to what's happening anywhere else in the country. And a lot of our new home buyers here are coming from New York, really basically the Northeast. And they're having to sell their homes there and all those kinds of things. That has an impact on us. But as you say, it's not as bad as it was before because we do have our local economy and our local jobs. And we still have retirees, and people still want to be on the coast. Yeah. But we're affected by everything that's going on, all the noise outside of us as well.
Well, and then of course the big thing that we've seen hit that has really just shaken like the Florida housing market, which has been insurance prices rising, and we just had a battle here in North Carolina, and the insurance, I think it was the rate bureau was like, the insurance company said they wanted to raise by like 100% or something, and then of course they always do that, and then the commission negotiated, and I think we're about 16% or something over the next 2 years is what we're going to see here on the coast.
Our tax rates our personal property taxes have gone up, and our real estate taxes have gone up because the values have gone up. Yeah. I know that the county commissioners are trying to keep the rate down. I hope they do so. But it's all going up. It's more expensive to live here than it used to be, but more people want to be here. And I remember people coming here from the Northeast 20 years ago talking about their property taxes being $10,000 a year. We thought, oh my God, well, guess what?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is kind of, we are seeing that debate right now. We saw, I think it was, now they do every 4-year evaluation in New Hanover County, and I think in that 4 years they went up 60% property valuations, and which tracks.
Which tracks.
Yeah.
I had a lot of clients call me, what the heck? And I said, well, what did they say your house is worth? And they tell me, I said, would you sell it for that? And they go, no. And I said, so let's just try to keep the rate down.
No, I mean, that it is kind of funny because I do see some people, and it's like, I think we may actually have gone up more than that, but that's we're not going to tell anyone that.
Right.
But since you've seen that the property values increase, but like I said, the insurance thing, I think we are obviously much better off, and also I think that you've seen just the fact that we have, because a lot of condos and everything are still relatively new compared to say somewhere where Florida where they're having issues with the buildings. Right. And so all of a sudden you're going to see these huge assessments, and people are
yeah. There's that new tax. What is it? The law tax or something that or insurance that these older buildings have to have now.
Yeah.
And if you have, even if you're just in a 4-unit building, all of a sudden the insurance is going up considerably. You didn't know that was going to happen. Well,
yeah, I mean, that is something that you're going to have to deal with. And obviously, the closer you are to the water,
right,
the bigger impact that you're probably going to feel. But it does feel like, knock on wood, we have had our hurricanes come through here. But it's not like Florida.
No.
And so I think that is one of the other things that's sort of attractive, is that we do sort of have that sort of coastal thing. The coastal life, you are on the water. We got the intercoastal. But it does also at the same time. I mean, what's really amazing about Wilmington is that you're at Riceville Beach and you drive 30 minutes and you're downtown Wilmington, and it's not like a city, but it kind of is. And so it's just such a rarity to have that sort of downtown kind of life and then a beach life, and to be that close. You just see what people want to move to.
I agree. I mean, if you look at Charleston and Savannah, which we've always been compared to,
yes.
Downtown Charleston is a long way from Folly Beach or Sullivan's Island. And in Savannah, gosh, it seems like forever to go out the causeway to get out to, Tybee in Savannah. So it is neat to be able to leave the city limits of Wilmington and be at Riceville Beach.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of the really cool things that we have. Unfortunately, it also means that we can't go east or west with regards to building. I did want to talk about, what do you think is going to sort of happen? Because, we hear a lot of, we were talking a little about recessionary cycles.
Right.
And there's no doubt that we're seeing fewer transactions.
Right.
And so, you have a lot of real estate agents, a lot of people in the mortgage business, sort of got in the business, a lot of people now getting out. And so, from my perspective, it seems sort of like, we just sort of maybe expanded too much. That level of activity just wasn't going to continue. And so the people that are kind of good at what they do, they're going to stay in the business. And then the people that probably should never been in the business in the first place are going to go out. And it's sort of like any industry. It's just we overexpanded, and both sides, mortgage and real estate. And so what do you see sort of happen? I mean, do you think we're still going to see sort of real estate agents kind of fall off and get a smaller amount of agents out there?
I see a lot of them getting out of the business for sure. They were doing 1 or 2 transactions a year, and that's, you can't sustain yourself that way. But there's always new people getting in the business too, so I don't know if the numbers are going to fall, but the number of agents that are really doing well, you can define that lots of different ways, I think has decreased. But those that have been in the business a long time and have a good client base and stay in touch with their client base, they're going to do just fine. As I mentioned earlier, just communicate with your clients, stay in touch with them, and then when the market does come back, you're going to get busy again, real busy. Yeah. And this was never a job where you thought you guaranteed monthly income, So you got to look at the big picture. But I do think people will be getting out of the business during this cycle. But then they'll all jump back in again when it starts.
No, it's true.
Their mother-in-laws and.
Well, I did kind of want to ask you about that because, like in the mortgage business, most companies require you to do X amount of work. And if you're not doing it, you're out, mostly because, we actually are employees. And so we get health insurance. And so you can end up costing the company money if you're not doing a lot of business. I don't know how people are surviving if they're not doing a lot anyway. So you're out. But in real estate, you're right. There are people who sort of are part-timers and they do a couple transactions for family members or things like that. Do you think that sort of distorts the market a little bit, or is that's just always the way it's been?
That's always the way it has been, and yes, it does distort the market somewhat. Most companies prefer not to have those part-timers, and most companies, including ours, we pretty much ask that you be full-time, but inevitably it happens. Someone starts to slow down or retire, and you don't want to kick them out the door. They're not hurting you. It does happen, but I think that full-time brokerage is where you're going to provide a good income for your family, is being a full-time broker, and that's what we try to do. That's what I do, except for when I'm goofing off.
Well, your kids aren't playing sports anymore. So.
That's right. But I do have a grandchild.
No, that's true. There you go. And then what do you see happening sort of with the housing market going forward? Obviously rates are going to be important in that. Just looking at it after 2 years of us, everyone thinking, okay, rates are finally going to fall. And so assuming rates sort of kind of remain where they're at, do you think it's just going to be more people, as we talked about, sort of just life changes or people just accepting that, okay, this is where rates are?
Well, life changes is what you've got to look for first, because that's going to dictate them moving. But I do think the market will, as I said, it's cyclical. It will come back. It'll get strong again. Is that because of an interest rate drop, or is it just the economy as a whole gets better? I'm not sure, but there is a cycle in there, and it will get better. As far as the luxury real estate market, and again, our offices being up and down the coast of North Carolina, that's as good of a hedge as anything, because people always want to go to the water. And so our numbers this year are better than last year right now. But not the market as a whole, but ours are with our company, again, because of what we focus on. And because people do want to be at the water.
I could say from our perspective on the mortgage side, I feel like we're doing a little bit better than we were last year. And so I think a lot of it is some of the discount brokers kind of getting out. Like there'd be these one guy shops, and they just couldn't make it. And so I think we're getting a little bit more business because of that. But to your point, I think it's just we're seeing a little bit of an uptick. People are finally realizing those life changes are unavoidable, and you got all that equity, so tap it and just pay the higher rates.
Well, and if let's just say you're at a medium market and you're contemplating getting a bigger home, your family's getting bigger, and you're sitting there on a 2 3/4 interest rate in the current home, and you're going to have to go to 6.5 in the next home. Well, if you're going to buy that next home and live there for 5 or 10 or 15 years, the appreciation you're going to get in that home is going to more than pay for the fact that your interest rate's higher.
True, yeah.
And so you're making a mistake not making that move just to save on your mortgage a little bit, because you're not going to get the same appreciation of that you had on this lower priced home that you would on the higher priced home.
That's true. A 10% rise on a $500,000 house versus a $200,000 house.
There you go. You said it better than me.
I saw we're numbers people, David. Let us handle the numbers.
There you go.
But I think you are right. That is sort of the thing that I think people are going to realize. And it's sort of that mid-range level, I think, is very indicative of, I think, is where you're first going to start to see those moves happen.
Yep.
So we'll keep a lookout for that one.
Yeah.
Well, David, I appreciate you taking the time. I know this is not one of your downtimes. You are busy right now. So.
I am fairly busy right now, but I've enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, Tyler, and look forward to seeing this, I guess, wherever it is to be seen.
We'll see where we end up putting it. We'll see where we're allowed to put it. So, David, thanks again. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you.
So there you go. There was my interview with David Benford. Once again, I appreciate him taking the time, joining us here on the Cape Fear Report. Good thing I don't talk for a living anymore. But yeah, I do appreciate him taking the time, joining us here on the program. Like I said, my goal is to interview people in real estate, real estate agents, as well as sort of ancillary kind of professions that are a part of a real estate transaction, real estate attorneys, insurance agents, as well as others. There's more parts of it. Inspectors, appraisers. That is sort of, I'd like to interview kind of everyone and just give you a feel for what they think is happening with the market as well as what's going to be happening. And so I appreciate David joining us here on the program, especially having to deal with my technical issues with the microphone not working. It's like one job, Tyler. You have one job. It's a podcast. Make sure the mic is working. And, I learned my lesson. So at least next time both mics will be working. We'll see what other problems arise. But I appreciate you guys tuning in to another edition of the Cape Fear Report. And remember, as always, do not wait to buy real estate. You buy real estate and wait.